So, go ahead and find a seat if you'd like. There's refreshments in the kitchen area. Welcome and thank you for coming. It's a kind of a wet day, and this is a very gratifying turnout. It's our very first one, and Beth was gracious enough to be the lead-off person. So, again, thank you and welcome. I'm Mike Monroe. I'm a director with the Historical Society. We have Sandy Del Cuesta. Ellie's always working, okay? She's moving things all the time. So, Kathy Sullivan, our president's in the back. Who else we have on the board here? Jean's there, okay. Jean is, well, how many months now? 2 months on the board? 2 months, okay. So, let me give Jean a round of applause for volunteering here. So, Ed Brown. So, Ed has a small business in town, and he does like family histories. So he'll do recordings of someone, like go to their home, and he'll put together a production, either on a DVD, whatever medium that you would want. So he does a lot of biographical or autobiographical research and puts things together for families. It's really a cool idea. In addition, he's been immensely helpful to me and the Historical Society, because when I talk, I just talk. I don't use a microphone, and so the tech part of this whole thing is kind of a foreign thing for me. So, Ed, thanks so much. And Ed and I are working on a Charles Kellogg project, so I have to mention Charles Kellogg at least once a meeting. My friend Tim over here will smile, because every time I see him I have something to say about Charles Kellogg. But we're putting together a program for the Sierra Club in the summertime, so that's going to be a lot of fun. So,
just one other thing, the company's Forget It Not.
Oh yeah.
And I'm right above Just Breakfast there in town.
Yeah. Is that the Skeels building?
No.
Nope. Whose building was that?
I don't know, but somebody told me it's haunted.
Oh, okay.
Where was it?
So,
Where the chamber comes.
so the building has the Levi's. It'll come to me in a minute. So, as I get older, I forget these things, even though I read about them. So, well. So, why am I so proud to be here? First off, Kathy and the rest of the board of the Historical Society have given me a lot of free rein to go out and have fun. They do all the work, and I just go out and play around. I talk to people, go on hikes, and go explore. And the ladies keep the place running as I kind of frolic around the countryside. One of the perks of being with the Historical Society is that I have met a lot of really interesting people over the past few years, and I've been able to interview them in a very casual sense, okay? And usually we just sit down around a kitchen table, or maybe in a coffee shop or something, and just have a conversation. So this is kind of launching from that idea. Why not just have a conversation, very casual, let Beth talk. I'll have some questions and stuff, but just have a conversation, and it's no big to-do. I always have a few questions, and thank goodness Beth has a wealth of, she's been here a while, okay? So I have some things I'm always, kind of prepared, but I want to let Beth and our guests for the next 5 months after this just have a chance to talk. The program today is about an hour or so of Beth, and then maybe half hour, a little less, of you asking questions, okay? So what's it all about? I really think that the more occasions we have to look at the history of the area, that it helps us put down roots. If we keep putting roots down by maybe visiting a place or talking to somebody, it really gives me a sense, and I think everybody gets this sense of some sort of ownership or pride in the community just because of what has come before us. So every chance I get. I like to do research, and I like to write, and I like to talk to people. And it's all based upon that. I'm not going to be moving away. We're putting roots down. We've been putting roots down for 30 years. And we just like the place that we live. It has changed over time, of course. So I always have 3 questions, though. Got my little notes here.
Excuse me, I just thought of the name of that building.
Yes.
It was the Gould Building. Yeah.
Okay.
Gould. I have to think a while.
So Beth, you know, is very shy. I'll have to pry out information from her. And she's coming up, on your 29th birthday now?
Yeah, at least.
At least 29th birthday. Okay. So she has seen a few things over the years, but I have 3 different, what I would call conversation points that I would want to try to address. And the first one is just have Beth talk about, like, give you a little biography of herself. When did she first come to Morgan Hill? What motivated her to become active, involved in the community and history in particular?
That's my program, so you'll hear it.
Okay.
Okay.
And the last one, and this is the question I always enjoy tossing out, is history of value or relevancy to our community? I'm very hopeful it is. You are all here. Kathy and the rest of the board work very hard to make sure that the community values the history, the heritage of Morgan Hill. So I'm curious, later on I'll ask Beth, and I'll ask her why or how can we make sure that the younger generation values history? Why or how can we make it more relevant to them? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth. So Beth, why don't you start with a quick biography of, in 2 minutes or less. No. Uh-oh. This is very fancy here.
Okay, I'm Beth Wyman, and I think I know most of you, and a lot of you have been here longer than me, so you know more than I do, so you can correct me at any point. And I want to welcome Marilyn Liebert, our vice mayor.
Oh, great.
Nice to see her. And I want to also congratulate the board of the Morgan Hill Historical Society. They do a great job. They come and set up, and they take down, and they manage everything so well. It's really nice. And it just occurred to me, I hadn't thought of telling about this before, but being in the house makes me think of Addie Walgren, who was here for, at least 15 years with Walgren's Antiques. And some of you probably visited her. She was a sweetheart. She really enjoyed history. She always wished that she had enough money to fix up the building, and she never did. And she really, really liked history, and she enjoyed it. And we on the Morgan Hill Historical Society thought that she would leave the house to us. So we talked about it, and she acted like she agreed with it and all that sort of thing. And little did we know, a very handsome elderly man from the Lion's Eye Foundation started coming and visiting with her and taking her out to lunch. And it was years before we knew that she had given the house to the Lion's Eye Foundation. I mean, I didn't know that until we recently got a title search on this building here, and we realized that that had happened many years before we found out. And we didn't find out until Addie died, and then we talked to her lawyer, who took everything and said, you can have this stuff, and she left a bunch of junk, in here. And it was very, what should I say? It was very disappointing. But that's the way it happened. But it turned out okay, because the Lion's Eye Foundation didn't want to deal with a, quote, historic building. It was on the National Register, so they had to deal with it. They weren't given any choice about that. So eventually it went to the city, and then it went to the Historical Society, and it is what it is today because of all the good work that this board has done. Kathy?
Beth, maybe address the fact that the foresight of the people that got it on.
I can't hear you.
Can you address
us how it got on?
Yeah,
Who did it?
The foresight
Oh.
of getting it on the registry before it got transitioned to the Lions Eye Foundation.
Yeah,
Because
right.
it never would have happened
No,
after that.
right. No, Mary Lou Lyon, I don't know if some of you remember her, she was very interested in history, and she just took it on herself to do it, and she wrote the application, and it went to the city, and the city actually asked me to come in and critique it, and I did, and it went to the state. If it's approved at the state, then it's a shoo-in at the federal. And so we got it through the state and then to the federal, and it was actually adopted and on the National Register. So that's a very important thing. We're looking at doing a registration right now for the Grange building, and we don't have very many old pictures of the Grange building. So if any of you have old pictures of the Grange building, it was a school before it was the Grange. It was the second school building that the Morgan Hill School District built. And we're doing as much research as we can, but if any of you know of anywhere we could get some good old pictures of the building, we would like that. So I told you about Addie. I'm going to talk today about the tumultuous years, if you want to pass those
Yep.
out, of
pass this.
1974
Right there.
to
Thank you.
1977
Pass them around.
in Morgan Hill, where we had to do a whole lot of saving things. And I actually was working on my master's thesis at San Jose State at the time. I started when I was 45 years old and working and had kids, and worked 3 units at a time, 3 units at night at a time until I got my 30 units, and then did my thesis, and I wrote it on the history of Morgan Hill because by that time I had lived in Morgan Hill long enough, and I thought, well, you know, this is an easy subject for me. Well, of course it wasn't an easy subject, but it was easier than something else maybe. So that's how it all kind of happened. So I'm going to just go through the Yagas Valley zoning. I need my glasses. And I've had a cold, so I'm going to take some cough drops every now and then. Beginning in late 1974, Santa Clara County and the cities of Morgan Hill and Gilroy began to experience a rapid population increase that quickly reached unmanageable proportions. This impacted many areas of urban development, including zoning, public utilities, sewer capacities, and a perceived quality of life. My family and many others who moved to Morgan Hill in the early 1970s were moved here to escape the rapid growth of San Jose and became alarmed enough to take on some of the issues. I'm hearing that again from people. People are calling me and saying, I thought we had growth control. I think you're probably hearing that.
We do.
And I'm saying, yes, we do, and I try to explain that we had a catch-up of 3 years and so forth. The Yagas Valley zoning was the first issue that came to our attention. For those of us who lived in the Yagas Valley, we referred to it as our Dear Lucky Homeowner letter from the city. The city told us that a developer would be building 17 homes just beyond the corner of Teresa Lane and Yagas, and that all of us would have the privilege to pay for a new sewer for those 17 houses. Well, at that time, we were less than 40 homeowners in the whole valley. And we put together a Yagas Valley homeowners group, and to the city's astonishment, we protested this. They went, what? You don't want its love to buy a sewer, you know? Of course, we didn't want the 17 new homes, but our primary objection was that the sitting mayor was the largest landowner in the valley with 100 acres and had, unbeknownst to us at that time, rezoned the area from rural to 4 houses per acre zoning. The proposed new sewer line would have substantially benefited those plans for the development. So we wanted to downzone the valley. You know, we didn't know this when we started out. We just got that letter that said, pay for the sewer, and we didn't want to pay for the sewer. Then when we started exploring, at that time we didn't have computers, you know, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have all the access to information that we have today. But we did have Dick Victorino, who was one of the homeowners. And he worked, I think, at Lockheed, and he had a secretary who would run off flyers and things like that for us. So don't tell Vic and don't tell Lockheed, but that was, anyway. This led to a year of attending city meetings and not being heard. Virginia May Days was the mayor at that time, and of course she's a woman mayor, and we all of us women like to have a woman mayor. But Virginia was really, I like her a lot, but she was one of the good old boys at that time. And so she would, and she's a lawyer. So when I would get up to talk, she would say, Mrs. Wyman, how long have you lived in Morgan Hill? As if, you know, that made any difference with what I was going to talk about. But we got over that. And we told her that we wanted to downzone the valley and that we didn't want to pay for the sewer. And actually, it turned out we didn't have to pay for the sewer because we didn't sign, you know, he didn't have enough people to do it. And he had to hire somebody else to build a sewer. They did build the 17 homes. After that, there was a City of Morgan Hill temporary building moratorium because the sewer that we own with Gilroy, that we share with Gilroy, was very, very, very much over, what's the word?
I'd say oversubscribed.
That's right. There wasn't enough, right? So that forced the council to adopt an interim growth management policy in late 1976. This meant not accepting any new applications for residential projects requiring sewer hookups. Incidents of raw sewage flowing in the streets were reported. That was lovely. Many council meetings were devoted to arguments about how much capacity remained in the old city sewer. You know, we had a number, and Gilroy had a number, and some expert had a number, and, you know, we never knew what it really was. I wanted to read you the Dear Lucky Homeowner letter from the sewer, from the city. Sorry.
Yeah. Who was the one that owned the land where they built the 17 houses? I'm just curious, remember his name?
Was it Gardino?
It sounds
I'll have to talk to you about that later, I'm not sure.
Who was mayor of Morgan Hill at that time?
Virginia May Days was the mayor, and then I think Tom Castle became
Before
mayor
that,
after him.
Tom Castle was, and he brought all his land.
Well,
was in
but he was
town.
up there. He wasn't part of the Yagas Road part.
Right.
But it was getting to him.
He saying stuff, you know,
Yeah.
where it was his land and he's the mayor, so he brings it into the city, so he can subdivide.
Yeah. Well, and you can see, I mean, even today, we did downzone the valley, but not as much as we wanted,
Right.
but more than the city wanted, and more than Tom Castle wanted. So, Mr. and Mrs. Wyman, to date, approximately 35% of the area within the proposed district has signed to initiate the sanitary sewer improvements. Well, that was probably Tom Castle, 35%. This letter is for the purpose of providing an opportunity all of the owners to familiarize themselves with the current status and current estimated costs for improvements. Our cost was going to be $1,800 to hook onto the sewer.
That was a lot of money back then, for 1800.
It was a deal, but we didn't want it. Noted below is an estimated cost of your proposed easement. Although the attorneys informed us that the district may be initiated by request of 60% of the land area, it is desirable that as many of the owners sign the petition as possible. If you have any questions or comments, please call me. And this was Chuy Garcia, the engineer for the city. After Yagas Valley, which we kept going to city council meetings, and finally after about 2 years, the city council said, "What do you want?" And we said, "We want to downzone the valley." And they said to the staff, "Well, work with them and do something." And so then it took another couple of years for us to work with them to actually come up with a plan. Do I have a... I might have a Huh?
There's a podium, you should have a podium to put your papers on.
That's okay. Okay, here, I'll pass this around. This was the proposed plan that we finally agreed on. And it ended up being more closer zoning down at the foot of Yagas Road and up to 1 acre and 2 acres and 5 acres. So we weren't happy, the city wasn't happy, but it's the best we could do. Okay, so then we had this temporary building moratorium because of the sewer, and because of so many people coming into town and the schools not recognizing that that was going to happen, we had double sessions in several schools. So a key factor in adopting the building moratorium was the fact that the local schools were becoming overcrowded and some were on double sessions. And then at the same time, we had the Santa Clara County building moratorium, which was a new zoning adopted for the unincorporated areas because they were oversubscribed with all of their utilities and services and so forth as well. And this went on for quite a while and eventually came to acceptance of 20-acre zoning in the county, which is still there. Oh, well. Okay, I wanted to pass around a couple of things. Okay, this was what the Morgan Hill Dispatch looked like in 1977. And the top story was growth controversy. I'll pass it around and let you look at it. And this was, no, that's on E. I've got it. Okay. My glasses, what did they do with them?
That's me. Here you are.
Thank you. So that happened, and of course, all of the developers were very unhappy with the A20 zoning. That was a very disputed, controversial issue that went on and on at the county for a long time. And then, on top of that, suddenly we had Save El Toro as an issue because there was proposed to put 22 houses on the face of El Toro, along with roads and water tanks and all the stuff that goes along with houses. And so a group, it was the same group doing all of this at my house. A group calling themselves the Save El Toro Association successfully fought the proposal based on environmental law, or rather the absence of it. CEQA had just come in, California Environmental Quality Act had just come into being at that time, and the council wasn't up to speed on that. And so that's how we prevailed. But those of us who paid for the attorneys, which was me, and court, had spent 9 months not knowing what the outcome would be. I've described it as worse than a pregnancy. We finally had a hearing, a final hearing at we had a hearing at a local San Jose court and then a final subsequent hearing at the state appeals court in San Francisco. And in San Francisco, our case was heard immediately after the lunch break. We had all attended, hoping to dazzle the judges with our youth and vigor. However, we were shocked that the very old judges, were probably as old as I am now, appeared to be actually dozing off after lunch. I mean, they were dozing off. And our attorney is there going, no, 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 you know. It was shocking. It was shocking. But we prevailed. They gave us that. Then, because of all of this going on and the council really not paying any attention to us, we came up with Measure E, which was a growth control issue. And all the major players that had fought in all the previous issues that I've mentioned and who supported the county moratorium and who saved El Toro, joined forces and gathered enough signatures, 1,400 signatures in 10 days. You can imagine. I mean, we didn't have cell phones at that time. You know, we didn't have email. We walked and we talked to people. And sometimes people drove us out of the yard with dogs. Okay, the basis of Measure E was to limit the number of homes built in a major subdivision to less than 300 per year, and by holding a competition between developers who would acquire points by providing city improvements such as parks. The goal was to hold the city's population to 3,500 by the year 2000. That has since been
3,500 or 35,000?
30, what did I say? Okay, 35,000 by the year 2000. So that has been upped or re-adopted a couple of times. I didn't live here for a few years, and it was done during that time, and has reaffirmed the concept of growth limits, but tightened it up each time. Okay, here's some cartoons that you might. City closes door on future residential developments. That was the first moratorium because of the sewer.
So these are city council people.
Pardon?
These are city council people, right?
Yes.
Days and Castle.
Yes.
Leonard. and
Yes.
Beckman and
Right.
one in the middle.
And of course, the developers sued the county over the 20-acre thing and lost. And here's a cartoon about that. Here's a cartoon about that. And then they were kept referring to how we needed more housing in Morgan Hill that was affordable. And they were using as an example McKeon's Creekwood, which is up by Burnell Road and Hale, I think. And they were selling houses, 3 and 4 bedroom Creekwood homes at an affordable price of $58,990, $59,090. You could get a house in those days. And here's the 20-acre zoning. And then the Measure E. And the no on Measure E. There was a yes and a no.
Yeah, I remember.
So that's about it for that particular time period. We realized after Measure E was adopted that the city council was not going to even pay attention to it, that they were going to do the same old thing that they had always done. So then we said, oh my God, we have to run people for council. And because I had been the one speaking to the mayor all the time, because I was the only one that could stand up to her, you know, she said, Mrs. Wyman, how long have you lived here? Well, Mayor, you know. So, and because Hyman and Wyman sounded like a good running team, so we ran and we won in 1979. And it got a new city council. And then we had new city councils from that time on for about 10 years with pro-growth, no growth, or rather growth control advocates. So questions, yes?
When the target of 35,000 for year 2000 was set, what was the population Morgan Hill, you know?
You know, at that time,
Yeah,
well, it was probably 20,000.
I see,
So 35 sounded like a whole lot.
yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
What is the limit now?
What is the limit now? You know, I was gonna look that up. Marilyn, help me out.
Right now, I'll stand up here. Right now, we have on our books, it's 250 applications per year for new construction. And we're in the middle of what's called a general plan update, which is done every 10 years. And actually, this is going to be on the ballot for November, where you're all able to vote on this. All right? And we have capped the growth for the year 2035, which is a ways from now, at 58,000. Okay, right now we're 41,000. So that is a very slow growth. And when I talk about that, the downtown, the actual downtown core, Main to Dunn, there is no control on that growth, okay? That was passed by voter initiative 8 years ago when we decided to develop downtown. So we will have more growth in the downtown. But as far as rural community, we'll stay pretty rural. Our ratio is 70% residential, single family, 30% condominiums, townhomes, things like that. Personally, on the city council, I'm real tired of looking at all these condominiums that are popping up. I don't like it at all. I drive downtown or Honda, and it's like, whoa. Yeah, so I am very much, I wouldn't say I'm no growth because our city needs to grow, but very slow growth. So that's my take on it. So we're 41,000 now, and it'll go to ballot in November with a cap of 58,000. That is the
But
question.
no cap on the growth isn't limited to the downtown area. So
Right.
that can continue to grow.
Right.
Everything else is capped.
Right.
So that it could be that we would get more condominiums than a single housing.
Oh, in the downtown area, definitely the apartments and condominiums, so.
So there's no cap on that, but there's a cap on single family.
Yeah, there's cap anywhere outside the city little core, okay? 250 new builds per year.
If they're single family attached, they're not condominiums, they're single family attached.
That's not considered a single family. Single family is a house all by itself, with land all around it.
They have attached and detached.
So it can be a duet attached by a common wall.
That's not a single family, that's a duet.
Okay.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Okay, yeah, still each other.
Yes.
Kathy?
I'll just ask, it was about that these buildings keep getting taller and taller, and we can no longer see the beauty of Morgan Hill when we're driving through town. Some of these.
Can you stand up? I can't hear you.
I guess what's upsetting to me and other people I've talked to is the fact that part of the beauty of Morgan Hill is you can drive through town and see all the beautiful hills. Was they keep building these buildings taller and taller. Now we're seeing 3 stories, and the other day I heard we're going to, in downtown, 4 stories, high density. So it feels like we're ruining the whole flavor of our small town by making 4-story, 3-story buildings. I don't know what the answers are. I just know that a lot of people are I have clients come to me and go, what's going on? It's not staying in a small town.
Right. There's
And I tell
been
them,
a lot of issues about that.
get involved,
Right.
try to stop the growth.
And actually, Leslie's mom was one of our opponents during the measuring because she was a realtor. And
Reluctantly, she was pressured into it. It was a big family fight between my mom and my dad.
okay, well, I didn't know about that.
Kathy?
I guess the moral of the story here, or for you at both Maryland, is if we don't like this, you have to become engaged and communicate and work for change rather than complain about it and not be engaged.
I'm glad Marilyn was here because I really didn't know all the current facts. Thank you so much. Yeah. But that's true, right. If you need to go to meetings and keep up, and they're having the update on the general plan and the update on the parks, parks, whatever you call it, yeah. So, all of that.
Because if you hadn't gotten engaged, who knows what Morgan Hill would have
Yeah.
looked like?
Well, you know, it was just a really small group. I mean, it was Bruce Kitchener and eventually his wife, Susan, who's now a judge and lives in Morgan Hill. And Susan came over to my house she had 2 kids from a previous marriage. And she came over and she had a baby with Bruce after they first got married. And this was after all of this furor was over, but she came over and she wanted to get a law degree. I think she may have been divorced from Bruce at that time. Anyway, she had a baby on her hip and 2 little kids. And she comes to my house and she says, I need some help. I need to get into Gavilan College. I was working at Gavilan College at the time. I need to go to Gavilan College and I need to use their child care program, but they're telling me I make too much money and I can't do it. But that's Bruce's money, it's not my money. And so, can you help me? And I said, well, my neighbor actually works in the admissions office and I'm sure she can help you, but you have to wait till Monday. So my neighbor, Lila, helped her and we both take pride in that Susan is now a judge in Santa Clara County and very successful one, so that was great. But there is concern. I have a neighbor who just moved into my neighborhood right next door. She has 2 acres. She's from the city and she wanted to move to the country and she didn't want anyone else to move here after her. That was 2 years ago.
That's the story all along.
Yeah. So that's the issue I think that is, what should I say, bubbling up again. Yes.
So when did you move here to Morgan?
I moved here in 1970. I was telling somebody previously, a kid, a 20-year-old kid in a city truck drove up. I was out trimming bushes around my perimeter of my property, and he drove up and kind of skidded to a stop, and it sort of surprised me. And he got out and he said, oh, I'm sorry if I surprised you. And I said, well, I didn't expect you to stop. And he said, well, I'm going to put up a sign because they're going to be working down the street. And he was trying to be nice. And he said, so it looks like you're working hard. And I said, yeah, I've been doing this since 1970. And it looked like he had shock on his face, like, could anybody be alive at this? And then he went, he never disclosed to me what he was thinking, but he was in total shock.
Mm-hmm.
Beth?
Yes.
I personally thank all the people. At that time, I remember it was always in the newspaper, growth, no growth, growth, no growth, and all that stuff. And I personally thank all the people that were involved in that. We didn't talk about this, so all of that was something we were quite interested in. But having the plan at that time, develop Measure E and so on, I think has really benefited our community from then on. And what I hope for in the future is that the future planning will allow these young people with families to be able to afford something in town.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have different levels of pricing and of home use for people who don't have as much money as the other people who are quite well off. As we have quite a few people in that area, because that's really the core of what a community needs, is families that are going to help it grow and develop. So I think that was well planned then, so I hope it continues.
Well, there was no plan. We just did what we had to do, you know.
Right.
And it just kept leading into other things, and we never expected it to go
I think
where.
in 1973 there were like 13,000 people, which
Yeah.
was not very many.
Right.
Only 13. So it's gotten quite large. But I think as a community we have everything the young family would love. The community center, all of that stuff. It's so
Well, it was a really small group. I started to say Bruce and his wife Susan and the other attorney. that was working with Bruce and my husband and me and 2 or 3 neighbors on Yagas Road and several people in town. And all of us got a divorce or split up afterwards. I mean, it was like, you know, it was just too much, I think. I don't know. Anyway, so that's my story about those years.
You have some more stories?
Well,
So, first off, Beth. Okay, Beth is the author of Hiram Morgan Hill book. She also wrote the introduction to the Arcadia series book about Silicon Valley. She has her master's thesis, which is at the library. She's done a lot of things over the years. So, but I wanted to let everybody know where Beth lives. Did you guys move into that house on Yagas?
Yes.
Day one?
it was built in 1902, the original house. We just had it painted recently, so it looks better than it has. And it was added onto in the 30s. Actually, Mrs. Achilles' nephew was a doctor, and he moved into it in the 30s and put in the bathrooms, because in 1902 there were no bathrooms. So he put upstairs and downstairs bathrooms. And then the people that we bought it from moved in there in the 1950s, and they added on a kitchen and a downstairs room that we call the pool room, because they built a swimming pool, so it's near the pool.
Is that Seward's?
Huh?
There was that Seward's, right? The name of the people that.
Yes, the Sewards, yeah. Mhm. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, that had, and the oak tree in front, we think, is 150 years old. Rocky Garcia and I were driving around one day, you all know Rocky, and he was saying, bragging, saying, I have the biggest oak tree in Morgan Hill. I said, Rocky, come and look at mine. And I'm sure I have the biggest one, so. Yes.
Yes, I just think it's great karma that I was able to hear you speak today. I was over in an antique shop yesterday in SoCal, and I happened to pick up a book, Hiram Morgan Hill.
Uh-huh.
It was signed by you
Yeah.
to a woman in 1984. Her name was Ruth Mussolino from San Martin. And I came down today to do some research. They said, oh, Beth was going to be speaking here. And I thought, wow.
Well, let me tell you the story about Hiram Morgan Hill. I decided after I finished my thesis that I was going to write a book about what I wrote about in my thesis, which was all of Morgan Hill's history from the beginning and on. It was very messy, very messy. You know, it didn't make a good story to put it all together. So I decided just to concentrate on Mr. Morgan Hill, because a lot of people didn't know that El Toro wasn't Morgan Hill. You know, they thought it was Morgan's Hill. So I looked and looked and looked for, where'd the book go?
It's back with Kathy.
Okay. I looked and looked and looked for a picture of Mr. Morgan Hill, and I could find lots of pictures of his wife, who was a Murphy. And of course, the Murphys owned all land in Gilroy and Morgan Hill and everywhere else, Sunnyvale, everywhere. And she was always in pearls and fancy gowns and so forth. And I could find lots of pictures of her because she was a Murphy, but I couldn't find any of Morgan Hill. There were no pictures. I went to Bancroft Library. You can't believe where I went to try and find a picture of Morgan Hill. So I thought, well, I have to go back to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, where he was born. Maybe they have a school picture of him or an old newspaper picture of him or something. So I get to Cape Girardeau. It's on the Mississippi River, south of St. Louis. It's kind of a lazy town, and in the summer, hot, you know. So I spent 3 hot days going to the Historical Society, to schools, to people, to everybody that I could think of that might know something about Morgan Hill. But he left in 1880. He's not their guy anymore. You know, nobody knew anything. They didn't recognize that name. So I thought, well, so I was going to go visit my uncle in St. Louis, and on the way out of town, I saw the newspaper office, and so I thought, oh, I'll put a little thing in the newspaper that I'm looking for Morgan Hill. And the girl at the the 15-year-old at the counter didn't, of course, know anything about Morgan Hill. But she said, maybe Katie in the back in archives knows about this. So I didn't even know there was an archives at that time, but I went back and visited with Katie. And the minute I mentioned Morgan Hill, she got this shocked look on her face, so I knew she knew something. I mean, she went, you know, like that. And of course, it was a scandal. You know, read the book. It's soap opera. You know, it's really soap opera. So anyway, she wouldn't tell me. She just remained, no, I don't know. And I knew she knew something. So it was getting closing time. So I was just going to sit there until she told me something. I would sit through closing. So she finally did say, well, Mrs. Groves might know something. So I found out where Mrs. Groves lived. I went out and in a telephone booth at that time. You know, you go to a telephone booth, put a nickel in, and I phoned Mrs. Groves. And she said, oh, darling, well, of course, come up and visit with me. I'm Morgan Hill's cousin. I went, oh. And actually, the reason Morgan Hill left Cape Girardeau was he had an affair with his cousin who was her mother. So she knew the story, and she had a picture. And she said, it's too bad you didn't come to a year ago because we had a lot of pictures out in the barn on our farm, but the barn burned down.
Oh.
But she had these in had pictures in a drawer, so that was kind of fun.
So Beth, would you consider Mr. Morgan Hill your favorite personality of Morgan Hill history, or is there another person that always capture your imagination, or?
Well, I think Mrs. Achilles is my favorite Morgan Hill person.
Why is that?
Well, because she was a Kodak heiress, and she moved to Morgan Hill because of Charles Kellogg, and she built this wonderful estate that is still a wonderful estate. And, you know, who could ask for more than that? That's great.
She,
Where's the Achilles estate? Sorry.
Pardon?
Where is the Achilles estate?
It's up at the end of
Tenant.
Tennant,
Yeah.
yeah.
The Keala family lives there
on
now.
Cary,
Oh, okay.
Cary Avenue. Yeah, the Kealas have done a wonderful job of
Yeah.
restoring it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what really intrigued me, Beth has this really cool story. She and Joyce Hunter, years ago, went to...
Joyce did the interior for the Mamma Mia, what's now Mamma Mia's, when they opened, with historical pictures.
So Joyce and Beth knew the story of Charles Kellogg and somehow learned that his
Somehow,
travelogue...
I was teaching a class at Gavilan College in history, and I was telling them about this travelogue that Charles Kellogg had. And this kid says, oh, well, that's in my neighbor's yard. And in San Martin. And I said, well, I'm going right over there to talk to this man. He said, no, don't go there. He's a mean old guy. He has a gun. You know, he's very, very mean. And so I didn't go that day. But I talked to Joyce, and I said, so what could he do if we just knock on the door and say we're interested in the travelogue? He can say, well, sorry, you know, go away. And so we'll go away. But he didn't do that. He was sort of surprised that we were there. But then he invited us in and gave us cookies and tea and talked to us about how wonderful Mr. Kellogg was to him. And then eventually we kept saying, well, you know, the travelogue. And we got to the travelogue, and it was totally covered over with...
A tarp or something, or?
No, well, I think once had a tarp, but it was covered with oak leaves that had just not ever been taken off. You know, it was in bad shape. So, and I really regret that we didn't follow through with that. He said he didn't have any authority over his two sisters, who also worked for Mr. Kellogg. They had the authority over it, and I called them, and they both worked for the state at the time, and they said, well, they weren't ready to do anything just yet. So I went away, and I don't know what happened to Joyce, and eventually got to where it is now, which is,
Humboldt Redwood State Park. So,
It really belongs here.
well,
It did.
the log was, he actually did the work up there, and they had the resources to put it back together again. Whether or not we would have been able to do something with it would have been a question mark. So someone up in Humboldt had the strings, and they said, we're going to grab this baby, and they took it back up and refurbished it, and it's now on display.
At least we know where it is.
Yeah. So that, and the truck chassis was gone. So it was just the shell that was sitting in San Martin. So they found the truck chassis and put it back together again. So I read the story, and I can't, well, there are people here who know that I kind of go over the top with this topic. So, but it is a really interesting part of Morgan Hill's history. In fact, the whole East Ridge, you go up to the Achilles Estate, you got Irv Purchase property, now Fry's, the Bear Ranch, Mr. Thomas or Dr. Thomas with the strawberries. That whole little area up there is just full of history. So,
and has now been preserved.
and it's been preserved. So the property, the ranch land right behind the Kealas, has been purchased by Santa Clara County Parks. And the connection now extends all the way from Coyote Lake Park, Harvey Bear Park, now Coyote Highlands, and Coyote Ranch.
What was the Manu's property?
Yes, he had two of them. There are two parcels. And so that all connects to Anderson now, and you could go all the way up the Coyote Ridge to San Jose, and actually almost to Milpitas. So quite the deal. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I have a question about the area of the mushroom.
Uh-huh.
What is going on with that area? I never heard much about it.
So Mr. Kellogg, you know, this is something you shouldn't really ask, because I'll just start going on and on. But
I'll later if I need to.
I have to wait for your turn.
so.
I'll ask later.
No, Coyote Highlands is where the mushroom home was first built, and it's now in the process of being transferred to Santa Clara County Parks ownership. The home is not there. The mushroom is gone.
Right, but the area, okay.
Right. There is a little foundation,
Right.
and there's some other evidence of his tenure up there. So,
Does everybody know what the mushroom is? I don't know.
yeah.
In 1 minute or less? Exactly.
So, Kathy, you have to be the ringleader here, a ring master. Okay, so get the.
I'm just observing.
Okay. So, Mr. Kellogg, very interesting individual, colorful history, moves to Morgan Hill in 1913, builds a cabin in the shape of, he called it a mushroom, but it's a cabin up the hillside, way above the Keala property today. And the mushroom is his term for it. It's more than the hut, but it is not, it's a kind of a basic cabin. And he and his wife lived up there. I always find it amazing that a woman would agree to go up and live up on a hillside like that way back then. So
She was disabled.
yeah, she had rheumatoid arthritis. So, I'm sorry. I'll go on and on. So
So I guess, Jeff, based on that though, the philosophy of how he designed it, and why he called it the mushroom.
It looked kind of like a mushroom.
yeah, he put like a cap on the top of the roof.
Cap on the top.
From what I know of his autobiography, he wanted a fireplace in the center, and he did not believe in a back door in a house, because people's back doors were trashy. They weren't welcoming sights. So it was kind of interesting to read about his philosophy of where he lived, and his elements in a fireplace.
Right. So the Keala family, where they have the estate, there are two really large rock fireplaces that were built by Charles Kellogg. He was really into designing fireplaces that actually had a water component to it.
Air, water, and
Fire.
Fire.
Yeah.
Right.
So
He had a theory about that. And what was I going to say? Oh, when I was doing the research on this, he was actually did vaudeville in New York from the time he was a teenager. I mean, he could whistle like a bird. And it's kind of corny, you know, it's like, woo, well, this is the whippoorwill. Woo, woo.
Hey, Beth, you're good.
But it was entertainment at the time, and he was very famous because of it, because he could do this. So when he got his travelogue, he was going to go around from stage to stage and promote saving the redwoods. He was the founder of Save the Redwoods League, and he was going to publicize saving the redwoods by having his travelogue where he went on his programs. Well, so I wanted to find that record. And I knew there must be a record someplace. I asked everybody, Bancroft Library, everybody. Finally somebody said, well, you know, that sounds like something that Manny the Music Man in Beverly Hills would have. And I'm going, Manny the Music Man, you know, okay, whatever. So I give a call and he says, Manny the Music Man! And I told him, before I even could get it out, he knew what I wanted. And he said, yeah, I've got one. I said, well, save it for me. I'm coming down, you know.
So we have a couple of, they're 78s. We have a couple in the museum, so. Yeah, the bird calls are on YouTube. And
Are they on YouTube?
Yep.
Oh.
So you can hear quite a few of them. If you go to Charles Kellogg on the Victor website, because he was a recording star for Victor before it was Victor RCA, there's all of his performances are listed, and you could play a lot of them. So yes, Carol.
I want Beth to answer one of your questions about the importance of history to us.
The question is, what is the importance of history?
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that Mike.
Yeah, what's the value of
The
it,
value of it.
or relevancy to the community? I mean, you could write books on this, you know.
Well, I mean, actually, if you don't know the history, we're about to repeat it. I mean, that's the question, yeah.
Well, that's probably true, right. But I think it's important to know. People like the kid who stopped me, and when I said I've been there since 1970, was totally shocked that anybody would be anywhere in 1970. You know, I mean, he was totally didn't have any clue about that. So I think it's good to know the background of whatever you're doing, and it should be important because it does reflect on what happens. And I think what's happened to Morgan Hill has basically been good. We're not 4 houses to an acre in Yagas Valley, that's for sure.
Our house is on El Toro.
And no house on El Toro. And we don't look like Los Angeles with houses climbing up the hills, you know, that sort of thing. Actually, John Beachman, who was a young guy on the city council before me, now lives in Alexandria, and he worked for Mike Honda and Norm Mineta. And he was out a few years ago, and he said, oh, it just looks so, it's just, you know, Alexandria is a nice place, and Washington, D.C. is a nice place, but, you know, it's just so nice to see the hills. So nice to see the hills. And he was very, you know, impressed by that.
This is fun. I love talking and listening to stories. Everybody has stories, and part of history is not only just observing the facts. So I could read and tell you 1913 Charles Kellogg moved, but it's understanding or interpreting the history that makes it a lot of fun. Everybody has a perspective. So Beth, I can't thank you enough for leading off the conversation series. Let's give her a hand. I have a little something for her. So I'm a tea guy. I love tea. So it's a tea mug. I won't call it a coffee mug. And it has a wise owl motif to it. So what time do we have? I don't have my watch on.
11:02.
Oh, I'm early, huh? So I'm not going to wrap up. Kathy's going to talk a little bit.
I just want to shamelessly say that we have these for sale here. If you don't have one, it's an interesting read. And Beth self-publishes these, and we raise funds for Villa Miramonte by selling them. So we have these and other books here. So, and thank you, Beth.
from the historical.
Kathy, are you going to ask who's not a member here? Do we have any guests?
Yeah, how many of you are not members? Okay, Sandy will be thrilled because
You will not make it out of here.
the point, a lot of the point here, what we've learned is that, you know, if we don't understand history, preserve it, the stories, and be able to share those with future generations, we're not learning the lessons that we need to plan a better future. So that's what we're about. We're an all-volunteer nonprofit. At this point, we get no funding from the city. I'm working on trying to define a partnership with them whereby they do start helping to support this site as a national registered landmark. So those conversations are going on, but in the meantime, we own and have to preserve, maintain, and develop this 2.5 acre piece of property. So your membership helps us. Just the membership. If you want to get more involved beyond that, we welcome that. We have all kinds of needs for volunteers in very many aspects of business and recreation. So we encourage you. There are membership forms on the table. We encourage you to join today if you haven't, or renew your membership. There's also, Jean's holding up a little square back there that has the dates for our future events for 2016. So you might want to take one of those with you and put those dates on your calendars so that you make sure you can attend those events. I think the Spring Boutique's coming up. The Prohibition Party last year was the first time we did that. It was a huge hit. So a lot of these events are getting to be so popular that if you don't get on board and make a reservation soon, then you don't end up getting there. So I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank Mike for pulling this series together. It sort of fits in our mission of trying to do more about educating our community on our history. So Mike's done a great job of lining up speakers for the first 6 months, and then maybe feedback from these. Mike will tell you. We'll line up the next part of that. But this is sort of an ongoing thing. This, and then Kathy Devine has started for members only on Thursday nights, a night at the museum where you can go upstairs in the core. CORE stands for Collections, Office, Research, and Education Room. So easier than saying the museum attic. So you can go up there and be able to see things that aren't on an exhibit, participate in activities, and kind of get an inside view of what's going on. And Kathy needs a lot of help. Our museum has been small, a grassroots effort by many people. Carol O'Hare's husband, Bud O'Hare, Ed Acton is in the back of the room. It's his family's home that is over there, that is now our museum. So we're trying to grow that to become more professional and get more exhibits and do more community services through the museum. So we encourage you to join, come to those, come to here, and thank you, Beth, very much for all you've done and continue to do for us.
Well, it reminds me, one more story about the museum. When it was donated to the city, and it was going to become a museum, and we had a place for it by where the library is now. And we had worked, a committee had worked for a year deciding where it would be and what it would be and who was going to run it and all that kind of thing. And I was at that time working in Hollister, and I get a phone call from the city staff, and they said, Beth, your building is moving up Main Street. I had been trying to get a date of the move from the mover, but I could never talk to him, only his secretary, who said, I will talk to Mr. So-and-so, you know. And so I'm going, well, fine. I don't think I'll be there in time, you know. And they said, well, you know, the problem is we can't find the plan.
They didn't know where to put it?
They didn't know where to put it. And I said, well, we worked on that a year. I'm sure you, well, we can't find it right at the moment, and it'll be here in about 20 minutes, you know. So I said, well, Brad Spencer was on the committee, and he always was very interested in that plan, and I'm sure he has a copy of the plan. So go over to the fire department and get the plan. So those things happen, you know. But I was so surprised. They said, your building is moving up Main Street.
So, but that building almost didn't become a museum, right? So when the Acton House, wasn't it scheduled for demolition before? Or they were to do a fire test on it or
I
something?
think the people who owned it, though, got a better deal of giving it to the city.
Okay.
Ida Williams at Pavilion
Yes.
Restaurant, her and her husband
Yes.
bought the Acton property. And they wanted to, the house was all intact, and they wanted to construct a senior homes there, which is still on the property. And Chris Williams wanted to burn it down. So he went to Brad to burn it down, and Ida says, no, you're not gonna do that. We're gonna
Great
donate
for Ida. I didn't know that story. Oh, thank you.
We have the plaque in the museum
Mhm.
that was donated.
So then the house was moved a second time to this location.
Yeah. So this is the third location for the house, or the museum now, so. Future events. Yes, Tim?
Are we going to have some questions, not questions?
You bet. I have until 11:30, and I want everybody to either ask questions in general or just mingle around. Before I forget, though, the next guest is in February, Kim Moreno. So Kim's dad, of course, was longtime police chief. His mom is still living here in Morgan Hill. And Kim happens to be a Charles Kellogg fan also. I have this whole thing I can't get out of my system. So a couple other guests each month. So it's going to be like the third Saturday or so. I can't remember the next date.
The
but
next one's the 20th of February.
20th of February is Kim Moreno. And then in March, Connie Rogers, who is the longtime president of the Gilroy Historical Society, is going to be here. Connie also involved with city politics and growth issues, but because I live in Gilroy, so I'm a hometown kind of thing, But then we have Edmund Sullivan, who is the director of an agency here in Morgan Hill. It's called the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency. It's a big deal. Not many people know about it. So, Robin Shout. So, does that name ring a bell to anybody? Robin Shout? Okay. Her mom is Joan Sullivan. Okay. Robin is the director of outdoor recreation and interpretive services for Santa Clara County Parks. So I'm a volunteer for County Parks also, so she's kind of like one of my bosses.
Remind them of Sullivan's Last Stand.
Sullivan's Last Stand, off of Cochran. And, yeah. In fact, they owned Coyote Highlands, that property, and they wanted to develop it also at one time. So, and finally, the last speaker, her name is Julie Hutchison. Julie is a land use advocate for the Committee for Green Foothills, and very articulate, lives in Morgan Hill. So you can see the kind of the bent that I'm taking is kind of historical, kind of land preservation, that's kind of my orientation. So, and it's fun. These people all have different ways of looking at things, and we're not intending to be political, but it's just you get information this way. So, before I conclude, does anybody have questions of Beth in terms of the whole group? Yes, Tim.
So on the front page of the December 1977 paper that was being circulated, at the very bottom is a little tiny story about it being the third year of a drought. and being thankful for the rain that finally came in December, but it wouldn't be enough to end the drought. Do you remember that drought?
I remember that drought. And I remember the El Nino afterwards, because at the corner where the guy supposedly put in the sewer, and they built the 17 houses, and then somebody else built a house across the street from me. They didn't connect the pipes in the right way, and so we had a flood because the rain was going where it always went, was down to Yagas Creek, which was through my property and down to Yagas Creek. So we had to call the city, and they came out and they fixed it, but it was interesting.
Your house is located on the corner, and before
Do you know the name of that family?
The Rose.
Rose used to work at the library, but what was
Yeah.
her last name?
Rose was their last name.
Rose is the,
Yeah.
okay, and what?
Jesse Rose, and then Margaret Rose is his daughter that worked at the
They
library.
tore it down.
They tore it down, but how much property was that there? Do you know?
20 acres
20 acres.
or 30, I'm
So
not sure.
it was cut up quite a few parcels, I
Yeah.
guess. When did
And they built a new house.
When did they move here, do you know?
Who, the Roses?
Yes.
Well, they were a long time when I was here in 1970 when I came, and they had a prune orchard where all the houses are now.
Because I know that was all almonds on one side there, in the almond orchard, whatever you
Yeah,
call that.
right, an almond orchard.
So that was prunes in that neighborhood on the other side?
He had prunes across the street from me, was
Oh.
prunes,
Okay,
but he had almonds as well. He had a lot of property.
okay.
And the one person we didn't, oops, I'm sorry.
Well, and that was built for part, my house was built by the Walker family from Maine, who owned a lot of property and had prune and apricot orchards all over what is now Yagas Valley. And I have, if I know we're gonna talk about Yagas Valley, I'd bring you a picture, but you know, there's pictures of the orchards. And then their relatives came out and built what was the Rose House. Walker relatives. And then across the street from me, the house is still there, but I'm not sure for how long. Leslie, you'll have to,
Well, you mean the Dutch gambrel style roof house?
Yeah.
They call it Clutch Colonial with a gambrel style roof. The people that bought it do not plan at this time to tear it down.
oh,
They do not plan to subdivide it.
oh, well.
So, keep my fingers
Last time I
crossed.
talked to you, it was a different story, so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, okay.
And
so it-
Pat, Ray Garrett, whose great uncle was Pat Garrett, used to live in that house. When George Savini owned it, he rented it to Ray Garrett, whose great uncle
Okay.
was Pat Garrett.
So there's lots of historic houses right on that corner, and Leslie Ames' house is one of them. But that house that we're talking about that is diagonally across from the corner is an old house that some people just bought. And it was also a Walker family house. They brought all their relatives out from Maine and built them a house. That's the way you did it in those days.
Did you ever know Gladys Jackson or Ruth Lowe?
Oh, sure.
Tell us a story about Gladys.
Well, you know, Gladys and Ruth were a duo, and they used to come into the Nob Hill. Are you sure? Want me to talk about this? Just like,
I don't know this story, so.
okay, they, you know, the Nob Hill, what is now Morgan Hill Foods, used to be the Nob Hill Market. It was the first Nob Hill Market. Big deal. I mean, I had a friend who lived out in Yuba's Valley, and she said, "Oh, you got to come to Morgan Hill to the Nob Hill. It's such a great store." Yes, you know. Right. So I did come to Morgan Hill, and it was a great store. But Gladys and Ruth used to drive up in their Cadillac. I think it was a white Cadillac or a pink Cadillac, and they wore house dresses like old-fashioned house dresses and cotton house dresses. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
And then big hats. And they would come shopping together, and they get out of their Cadillac and they go in and shop at Nob Hill. Then they come take their stuff up to where they lived.
But just tell us about where they lived.
Well, the house where they lived is still there, but it was moved from down at the bottom of the valley when they built the dam up to where it is
So
now.
it would have been flooded, right? I mean,
Yep, it's been underwater.